Hi, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Programs broadcast. I'm Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is Wednesday, September 21st, 2022. With the reintroduction to adults at Evoke's Wilderness Therapy Program, I'm happy to celebrate by having this topic. Tonight, we're going to be talking about how to handle it when your child turns 18 in the wilderness. And really, we're going to be talking all throughout about principles that are common to all of parenting. As I think about all of the broadcasts we do, and I think about the various principles that we have, it comes back to some very seminal, core, foundational principles, and I think tonight is going to be no exception from that. Before I get into the content, I want to remind those of you that are listening that has been a new date added. We filled up our first date November on November 4th. We filled that one up, so we have another date for the Conscious Parenting Workshop. We've added December 2nd to that. It'll be from 9:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Mountain Time. This is going to be a group discussion, an all-day class. So it's not just me lecturing like I do in these broadcasts, but you folks are going to be on video. We're limiting the number. That's why we opened up a second class. So if you're interested in joining us for the Conscious Parenting Workshop, which I'm very excited to hold, email us at intensives@evoketherapy.com or call at 866-411-6600. With that, let me get into the content. I wrote this in the Audacity to Be You. Codependency, like mental health and mental illness, is a continuum, and we are all on it somewhere. Codependency is a pop psychology term. It's not in the diagnostic manual. It's more descriptive. In more descriptive psychological theories, we would refer to codependency as a lack of self and the subsequent relationship dynamics that are created when there's a lack of self. Codependency speaks to the quality of the attachment. All throughout the evening, I'm going to be talking about this idea of developing a self. Developing a self, knowing who you are, knowing what you want, what you can tolerate, and being able to kind of put your stake in the ground at a certain point in relationships is all about having a self, being who you are in relationships. And our children and our partners and those around us learn who we are by what we will allow and what we won't allow in our lives. Another point that I'm going to be talking about tonight is as I talk about parenting and healthy parenting all throughout the evening, a couple of points. It's really about learning to think in a different way, learning to be in relationship to ourselves and to the other person in a different kind of way. And most importantly, there's no necessary guarantee of outcomes when we practice healthy parenting. If that were so, if if healthy parenting were a simple cause and effect, then we would be reducing our children to mere objects. They would simply be the outcome of our behaviors, much the same way that a light switch on the wall can be manipulated by me without any choice in the matter, without any agency. That's what we would be thinking about our children as. And importantly, if we think of parenting and its outcome as well-behaved children, no matter what we do, it's really going to be hard, nearly impossible to get it right. Our children will often feel that energy, the energy that we can control them, that we can predict their behavior, control their behavior. And that, in essence, is what they're fighting against, what they're resisting. Because their job, just like our job, is to develop an independent, healthy, robust sense of self also. And so our ideas about controlling and shaping them up the way that we want them to be, our idea about that is in itself the problem, the poison, not the cure. And it leads to the problems that we're all wanting our children to rid themselves of or to heal or to work through. So I started off with codependency because that's in essence the principle that we're going to be skirting around all evening. We know that today that there are specific challenges on emerging adults, young adults, late adolescents that are unique to this age. Perhaps that's always the time. We know that there are economic factors that challenge them more than previous generations. There are social factors. There's even a technology factor, of course, that exposes them to things that we weren't exposed to. I love when I've read that idea that the human nervous system was meant to handle local emergencies, local threats, local catastrophes and injustices. But what social media has done to us is it's exposed us virtually to all of the world's injustices. and our nervous system can be compromised by that, can be felt to be constantly under attack by that. And our children are growing up in an age when that is has never, of course, been more prolific than it is today. We think of children in terms of a systems perspective, which is not the same as a cause and effect, but understanding the context, understanding behavior within a context, within a family system, within a social construct, even within the zeitgeist of the experience of the child, the world that they live in. We think of it in those terms. It's really an age of instability, an age of transition. I remember when I was in woodshop as a child, middle school. One of the things that all of us were asked to do was to make a breadboard. Maybe some of you remember that. And our teacher, our woodshop teacher, he made a breadboard. And what he would do, what he did at the beginning of the class, is he broke it over his knee. And then what he pulled up, when he pulled up the two pieces of the breadboard that he had made himself, he wanted to show us if they had broken in the middle of the wood or at the seams. And very, very often with new builders, with new carpenters, they break at the seams because that's the weakest part. That's the part of vulnerability. So transitioning is difficult for everybody. Transitioning is a time of vulnerability. That's why we often encourage you, if you're going to go for a subsequent placement, residential placement after wilderness therapy, to have as little in between time, no matter how much you want to celebrate and relax and enjoy yourself. That is the most vulnerable time. And same with adolescence into young adulthood. It's a time of vulnerability. It's a time when they're focused on themselves and they're susceptible because of the freedoms that are often granted in early adulthood. They're susceptible or they're exposed to behaviors that they weren't exposed to when they were younger. I was just talking to my son who was heading back to college, and I was teasing him, or we were talking about something. It was a light subject, and he said to me with a smirk on his face, he said, "Whatever you want to say today is fine, but next week I'm going to be in back in my apartment at college, and I can go to sleep when I want, I can wake up when I want, and I can leave things as messy as I want to." And that's part of the job. Part of the job is to experiment with who you are and to kind of learn how the world works and how the world operates, and to experiment in a way where there's going to be a lot of failure, a lot of struggles. I've thought about this a lot this week. Tiny bit of a tangent. I thought about parents who place their children in programs like ours and like I've had to do with my children, or I've chosen to do with my children. And I thought about how sometimes, is that a sign? What's that a sign of, that a child, quote unquote, needs treatment? And what I've felt in this last week as I've been thinking about this question is, what's that's a sign of, when a parent makes a placement, is an assertive, active, proactive parent, a parent who's making a courageous and difficult decision to give the child what they need. I think even in my own mind, after all of these years, decades of doing this work, I can fall back into that old thinking from my early childhood, that it's a simple cause and effect, and that if a child is struggling with a mental health issue or an addiction issue, then it somehow equates to a parent failure. And that kind of reductionistic thinking is part of the problem in mental health these days. That the oversimplifying of very, very complex systemic issues. So we're going to talk about connection and boundaries, and that's really the essence of what we're trying to create when we talk about creating a certain secure attachment, a strong foundation for children. And how do you make this kind of decision, and how do you, when do you decide to use leverage with a 19-year-old and to say you're not welcome at home, or we're not going to support you financially? And when are you going to use something perhaps less severe, less stark, less of a leverage than that? And the first question of is, how serious is it? Even somebody was sharing with me lately about the side effects that they were experiencing from their medication. And the psychiatrist offered to this person, they said there are side effects. And really, what you have to decide is, are the side effects of the medication worse, or are the side effects, so to speak, of not taking the medication worse for you? And that's really what it comes down to, a math problem. in a lot of ways, except for that it's a very personal math equation. And really, as a parent, if you're a parent in this situation or a person in this situation, you're the only one that can solve the equation yourself. You get to decide. And there is no, I have seen parents take really courageous, difficult stances with their children, with their young adult children, and have it turn out well and have it turn out poorly. And I've seen parents that exhibit patterns of rescuing and enabling behaviors over the course of years, and I've seen it turn out well, and I've seen it turn out poorly. So again, you have to operate from a different place than measuring the success or the rightness of a certain decision by how the child turns out in the process. The big question becomes, should you leverage your child? Should you withhold money, a living situation, even to the point where you're going to back out of the relationship or other kind of supports? And that is a very personal decision. The relationship leverage, if you will, in my experience, my opinion, from my own perspective, is kind of the moment of last resort. Comes into play when the child's behavior is so toxic, so perhaps abusive, threatens your own serenity, your own peace of mind, where you have to pull back from it. And most parents don't get to that threshold, but some do. And it's amazing to me. I'm going to talk about this throughout because I'm hearing myself talk and I'm imagining what people are going to say about what I said tonight. Luckily, we have the recording. And so often I hear people quote me and saying, Brad would tell you to do this or Brad would tell you to do that. When in fact, it's my goal to never tell you what to do, but really to ask you to think critically. And it's not just a logical critical thinking, but a spiritual and emotional critical thinking. What do I need for myself? What am I okay with? So you get to decide if it rises to that threshold. If you think that the leverage is necessary, the situation is serious enough, then you're gonna hold back more leverage. It was one of the very first lessons that I learned in child development that the decision that you make when interacting with a child if they're about to run out into the street, that context dictates a certain kind of behavior from a parent that something far less threatening wouldn't dictate. It's okay to yell at a child, to scream at a child, to grab a child, to tackle a child who's running out into the street into danger. But you wouldn't think of that in much less severe cases where the stakes are a lot lower. You wouldn't think about that when we're talking about homework or not cleaning the room. You wouldn't employ those same kind of interventions. So it's a very, very personal. The very idea that I or any therapist can tell you what to do and that you should take that advice and swallow it whole runs in stark contrast to everything we're teaching parents and children in our program. We can tell you what our experience is. We can tell you what again, what the pros and cons. We can help you to think critically. I remember when people were asking me to write a book many years ago, before I wrote The Journey of the Heroic Parent. This is what led to writing that book. I remember thinking, what can I say to parents that already hasn't been said? There are so many parenting books already out there, and so what am I going to add to the literature, to the culture that's not already out there? And I realized that there were two things. One is I had my story. Nobody else had my story, both my personal story and the story of being a therapist and working with families in close proximity for many years. Nobody had my specific story, and I could tell that story. But once I got past that, and I thought, of what's my story gonna tell or gonna teach? It was really teaching parents how to think. This whole thing that I'm doing tonight, this whole thing that I do on this podcast, this whole thing that I do in psychotherapy is encouraging people to think differently than the way that most, nearly everybody I've experienced, had been taught to think growing up. And most of us have been taught to think in terms of outcomes. If I do good, good things happen to me. In fact, that's one of the ideas, the sensibilities that one of my favorite authors, James Hollis, talks about in his book. That part of life, part of the middle passage, part of growing up into the second adulthood, as Carl Jung calls it, is to destroy the myth of that adolescent or even that childhood idea that good things happen to good people and bad things happen to good people. It's so much more complex than that, of course. So how do we maintain boundaries while still making a connection, still providing a connection? Well, first of all, there's a surrender. There's a surrender to things that you can't control, and that's both for the parent and for the child. When I'm looking at a child or hearing a parent talking about a child and what the child is saying to try to get their way out of a program or to not go to program or to treatment, I'm listening for surrender. Is the child in a place where they're saying things like, "My best thinking got me here. I don't necessarily know what's best for me. I need help. I would love some guidance." In fact, more than half of the battle is won when somebody with a mental health issue or an addiction issue says, "I need help. I'm struggling. I need guidance. I'm willing to do whatever somebody that I trust. I'm willing to do whatever they say." Right there, I know that we've almost won our battle against the mental illness or the addiction. When people start putting lots of conditions on it, this is what it needs to look like. Well, this is what I'm willing to do. Tries to control it, really. It's the opposite of surrender. Tries to control it. That's when my ear starts to hear that they're still in their disease. They're still in their struggle. One of the things I like to say when a young adult child, says, I want to leave the program, kind of my last offer suggestion to the parents is, why don't you ask them which program they like to go to? If the program itself is the problem, then let's talk about which other program they would like to move to, and maybe we can start that discussion. It's kind of a way of calling their bluff, but also of maintaining the boundary, the distinction, if it's something that you choose that says, home is not an option. I'm not willing to support you coming home. You can walk away, you can leave when you're 18 if you want to, but if you've made that decision that I'm not going to support the experiment of you coming home now, then you might offer them a different option or a program if that's really the complaint. And most often they'll capitulate, they'll back up, they'll come back with a new argument that they want to come home. So you're looking for surrender in the process. You're and I always used to say with my clients, when clients start to say, "I know I need more help," I always tell the child even and the parents, "It sounds like you're about ready to go home, and try this without the guardrails." When somebody starts dictating all the things that have to be in place in a certain way, I'll go on to treatment or I'll stay in treatment if X, Y, and Z are in place, then I know that we're not quite there. Part of the question is, are you overstepping or controlling? I've told this example, I've given examples like this before. When somebody says to me, when my children have come to me, when I've had friends come to me and say, "Should I get married? Should I get divorced? Am I being a doormat or am I being too rigid? Should I send my child away? Should I give them another chance? Should I let them come home? Should I hold a boundary and leverage my financial support?" My answer to that question, and this is not just a punt on my part, but my real answer to that question is, that's your life's work to find that answer. Oftentimes, I'll say to people, like it says here on this slide at the bottom, how do you make decisions like that? Because these are big decisions, sacred decisions, difficult decisions. Oftentimes, the pat answer or the set answer is use leverage, and I'm supportive of that. If that's what you want to do, if the problem rises to the threshold where you think that that's the best option, I'm 100% supportive of that. No doubt about it. And I've seen a lot of success in that area. But again, there's a paradox, there's a nuance there that says that there's no guarantee. It is true that for people to change, they have to want to change. But part of holding a boundary like that is to raise somebody's bottom. You've heard that people have to hit bottom before they'll change. It has to be bad enough for them to change. That is absolutely true. But part of intervention is raising that bottom. When a boss fires an employee who comes in drunk, when somebody gets a ticket for driving under the influence, when somebody's spouse or partner says, "I don't want to be in this relationship anymore because of your drinking or your using or your abuse or your erratic behavior or that you won't take your meds." Be a part of those quote unquote interventions. Raise the bottom. Give the person something, some boundary to experience. I mean, that's really what a self is, you guys. The reason why a self is so critical to this is because when you have a self, that means your child experiences the limits of yourself. They know in a way that you exist, that that's not negotiable, and that they have to accommodate. It would not be ideal. It is not ideal that you become the most capable, all capable parent in the world, able to tolerate anything. And I think sometimes people interpret what I teach and what I talk about as that, and it's not that. If you were all capable, your child wouldn't bump up against limits. But you have a limited amount of energy and patience and time and willingness in a whole range of areas. You have what we call a self, a preference, a tolerance for things. And the key is to own that. The shift is that a lot of parents want to talk about the child as the problem. You're sleeping too much. You're not working hard enough. You're drinking too much. That's not really your business, so to speak. It's close, but it's more like I'm not comfortable with X, Y, or Z. If the child is an adolescent under the age of 18, it's much more clear, right? I'm not comfortable with you making a mess like this, or coming home late, or getting this grade in school. You get to set those boundaries and state those values and enforce them. But as the child moves into young adulthood and adulthood, it sounds more like this is what I'm willing to do and this is what I'm not willing to do. Are you overstepping or controlling? That is for you to figure out through your work. And the more work you do, I was talking to a client recently. I was super impressed by this. He was having a discussion with his wife, and his wife was asking him why he was doing a certain behavior. And they were having a discussion. And at the end of it, he was able to identify the need that he had, where it was coming from, the motivation. And what he said to his wife was, he said, I didn't know that in the beginning. It took me a while to talk my way through it. That's what psychotherapy can do. That's what doing your work can do. You understand what is beneath the surface. I always say to the folks that come to the intensives, one requirement, requirement might not be the right word, one idea that really sets you up for success in psychotherapy and treatment, even listening to these broadcasts, is that you allow for the possibility that something outside of your awareness is at play. And when you allow for that possibility that something in the unconscious might be driving your behavior, you set yourself up for success and expansion and awareness. You can kick them out if you want to. But because the like I said earlier, because the decision whether or not to kick your child out of the home is so sacred for a parent, I won't participate in taking on that responsibility. I've told this story before where I was teaching about codependency at a workshop, and a psychologist raised her hand and asked me, Brad, all of what you're teaching is well and good, but how can you tell us that we're supposed to tell a mother to kick her son out of the house, her addicted son out of the house, when the possible consequence is death? And I took a couple of steps back and I said, I'm so sorry that I led you to believe that that's what I was teaching. That's not at all what I'm teaching. My job And this is what it comes down to tonight. My job is to help the parent heal their own codependency, that is, to heal their own wounds, their own developmental trauma, the lack of development of a self, the lack of modeling that they had about what it looked like to have boundaries and remain connected to somebody. When I help them heal those issues, they'll decide for themselves, but I don't decide. Like I said, providing another treatment option. If you have any doubts that the treatment option that you're invested in, if it's wilderness therapy, if you have any doubts about it, providing them another option, an alternative, can definitely be a way to clarify things. What are we really asking for here? At the end of the day, you get to listen to everybody and decide for yourself. Part of our process is to empower you over time to become your own expert. That doesn't mean that you'll know everything and get everything right all the time, not even close. But it means that you'll have enough to know that your decision is good enough because you decided. That's good enough. Really, what it comes down to is developing. It's why I am so passionate. I wish I could shout this from the rooftops. I'm so passionate and at folks coming to a Finding You intensive, ideally while their child is in treatment. But even if you don't have a child in treatment, if you have a relationship problem with your spouse, if you have family conflict, if one of your children is struggling, you don't know how to reach them, do a Finding You. Do an immersive program into looking at and discovering who you are, what your wounds are. That is the number one predictor in the research to having healthy, secure relationships with our children. And I would argue with other people at the same time. How well you know yourself. Folks, I want to be clear, and I don't know that I've ever said it this clearly. The most, the largest sign, maybe the easiest one to see of mental health is when somebody knows what their dents and their bruises are, knows what their wounds and what their patterns are, especially, particularly the unhealthy ones. Mentally healthy people talk about their fallibility effortlessly. Mentally healthy people can apologize more easily. Mentally healthy people can listen better. Mentally healthy people can take forms of feedback, of criticism without as much shame and guilt. That is mental health, not knowing how great you are. That kind of just comes along with it. In fact, when you know that you're great, the dents and the bruises and the fallibilities, those are easy because you have them. You have them. That's not even, there's no good argument on the other side. And it will take the rest of your life for you to work on them. And you won't complete them. You won't become perfect. You won't finish and you won't arrive. So do your own work. It's the most paradoxical, ironic idea in this work. You want to help your child, do your work. You want to help your marriage, do your work. You want to help your extended family and friendships, problems at work, do your work. Because that basis of a relationship that you have with yourself is the basis for all other relationships. And the point is, I think, irrefutable. I don't think there's a good counter argument to the idea that all relationship problems and issues stem from the relationship that we have with ourselves. You understand your own part. Like I wrote in The Journey of the Heroic Parent, it's a shift. It's a shift from the question of who am I? Excuse me. It's a shift from the question of what do I do to the questions of who am I? Who am I? What do I want? What am I okay with? What's too much? What's not enough? Notice all of those questions have no absolute right or wrong answer to them. They're all relative. What can I tolerate? What am I willing to deal with? And you all know this, even in healthy relationships, you have to compromise and deal with stuff. That's why it's really hard to grow and develop outside of significant relationships, family relationships, living together relationships. As the Guru Ramdas says, if you think you're enlightened, spend a week with your family. As children in the wilderness sometimes tell me, I get along with everybody. I get along with my friends. I just don't get along with my parents. And my response is often, I said, well, it might be that your parents are uniquely crazy. That's a possibility. But most people can get along with friends and acquaintances, unless you're really low functioning. And the real test of your mental health is how you navigate more intimate and closer relationships. So you shift. We think the answer's out there. We think the solution is out there. And the great joy of my life was the discovery that I was the cause of my own unhappiness. It doesn't mean that I've got it all figured out. But when I stumble, when I fall on my face, which happens now and again, I can go back to the idea that it's me. I have to do something. I have some work to do. How do you measure success? Do you measure by outcomes? I used to ask this question at support groups. I would say, how do you know 2 years from now? Let's use the question of tonight. Your child's 18, they want to come home. They're done. They've worked really hard. They have great letters and assignments. They have a handful of great weeks of reports from the therapist. They've done a great job. And they tell you, this is my line. I'm leaving when I'm 18. I'll see you at home. Send me a ticket. How do you know 2 years from now if you've made the right decision? And I wait for people's answers. Often the answer is, well, if the child is overall in the big picture doing well, succeeding, happy, found meaning. They have specific indices like maybe the child isn't using, they're still sober, whatever it might be. And after I listened to all the answers, my answer is, you made the right decision because it was your decision. Because you get to make it. The picture on the cover of my book, The Audacity to Be You with a stick and the story that goes to it on the back? It's that. What's your stick? There's no right stick. There's just your stick. That's really this work. And the coolest thing about this is I'm talking about this tonight, about what is your work and answering the question of what do I do when my child turns 18 and starts to push all the work that I'm talking about. You're modeling for them the work that they need to do in their life because they're going to be in relationships. Many of them are going to have children and they're going to have to figure out how to be a self also. Remember this principle. If you don't remember anything from tonight, I was pausing for a moment to see if I really believe that. And I think I do. I have some confidence that I mean this. Remember that holding boundaries is about self-care, taking care of self, not about changing other people. I set boundaries even with my children. I'm not comfortable with you playing with a knife. I'm not comfortable with you using. I'm not comfortable with you not studying or not getting great. Whatever it is. It's about what I'm comfortable with versus this is what you need to do. And I'm going to figure out how to push the right buttons to get you to do that. That whole line of thinking is the problem. If you wonder, would something like a 12-step group help, like Al Anon or Codependency Anonymous or Adult Children of Alcoholics, which I highly recommend. Highly recommend. We ask our current parents to try at least 6, any combination of 6 of those programs during the course of their child's stay with us. You're walking into a group, into a room where people are thinking differently. They're not thinking the way that they were raised. They're thinking in this new way. Joseph Campbell calls this process that I'm talking about tonight a transformation of consciousness. Albert Einstein said, you cannot solve a problem at the same level of consciousness in which it was created. You have to transcend it. Move beyond it. Fundamentally, qualitatively, change the way that you think. In my early career, because it was my early career, I was young. It was about communication skills. It was about um, boundaries, even the dreaded behavioral contract. I don't know if I've said this in a long time, but for the first 3 years of doing these broadcasts, I've been doing them for 14 years. It'll be 15 in this December. In those early years, I would get an email a week from a parent saying they felt so horrible after listening to my broadcast, and I didn't understand it. I didn't get it. I knew I didn't want people to feel horrible, and I slowly discovered over time that I can talk about the things that we do, but that we're all human. We're all fallible. We all make mistakes. I can describe what a healthy boundary is. Doesn't mean I can do it every day. Absolutely not. Every single thing I'm talking to you about, there's a part of me that would dread this, of course. But part of me wishes you could just watch my home, watch me and my children and my wife, and see all the mistakes that I make. Knowing what I know, teaching to you what I teach, doesn't come from a place of having it figured out, having all the answers. It just, I have a sense of what the project is. And the project is me. And it's lifelong. And it's never finished. You begin to understand your own part. I say to parents all the time, in what ways are you actually participating in contributing to the problem, the exact problem that you want to see eradicated? And we do it unknowingly. You see how so much of this is about awareness, is about digging up and dredging up from the basement all of the unexplored material that is driving us. The last thing I have on this slide is the three C's. If you make it to Al Anon, one of the ideas that Al Anon is famous for is this idea of the three C's, which are I didn't cause it, I cannot control it, and I cannot cure it. You see, in Al Anon, you learn to operate from a place of authenticity. I'll give you the simplest example that might illustrate the point that I'm talking about tonight about healthy parenting and setting boundaries with an 18-year-old or anybody in this way. I'll say it this way: telling the truth. Think about that, telling the truth. When one tells the truth, one lets go of control. If you and I were friends and you asked me, we were going to go out to go to a movie this weekend, and I decided at the last minute to cancel because I was exhausted, I was drained, I was dealing with something, and I just said, "Hey, I'm just not up to it. My energy is low. I'm not feeling well. Tonight feels like a night that I need to stay in." That's honest. That's straightforward. Versus what a lot of us are conditioned to do and to say, which is we lie a little bit. We call a lot of things white lies. We make an excuse. The kids are sick. I can't come. We use words like I can't. Right? We find an excuse that justifies. These are important words. Justifies our decision, ourself, who we are. And we're expecting to be attacked, to be manipulated. But when you tell the truth, you surrender that. You say, you can be mad, you can not like it, you can not invite me next time. You don't justify yourself. And in so doing, you operate from a place of authentic self, and you can't control the outcome. The reason we lie, on the other hand, as a very simple example of the principle I'm talking about, the reason that we lie is to control the outcome, to control what somebody thinks or feels or does. So if you ever wonder what letting go looks like, just think of the example of telling the truth versus lying. Telling the truth is letting go of the outcome. Lying is trying to control the outcome. People in recovery from codependency, from the relationship issues that vex us, that would block your awareness about what to do with your 18-year-old child, people that are struggling with those issues, try to control. People that are in recovery from those issues and healing tend to tell the truth more often, set boundaries more clearly. I love this quote from the book Addictive Thinking by Abraham Tversky. He says, the mother of a young man who was destroying himself with alcohol and other drugs could not understand how he could be oblivious to the disastrous effects that chemicals were having on his life. She asked for help in dealing with him. But don't tell me, she said, don't tell me I have to put him out of the house or that I should not bail him out of jail. She said, I don't want to hear that. And the rabbi responded, please tell me how much is 2 plus 2, but don't say 4. She had been unable to see that her own thinking was no less distorted than her son's. That's magic. The minute you start to see that you have a twisted, distorted thinking that's part of the cycle, is the minute that you're free to work on the thing that you have some control over, your healing and your thinking. But to become hyper focused, even with our children whom we love, at least my experience is, we love them as much as we're capable of loving another human being. Even with them, we come to the realization that it's not our job to control or shape them up the way that we think they ought to be, but simply to support them on where they need to go and make sure it's in alignment with our boundaries, with what we're comfortable with or not, what we're willing to tolerate or not, what we're willing to co-sponsor, if you will, or not. From The Audacity to Be You, I wrote, recovery from codependency doesn't cure anyone else's addiction. I'm going to read that again. Recovery from codependency does not cure anybody else's addiction. Professionals would be wise to avoid teaching or implying that recovering from codependency will resolve anyone else's problems. That is one of the initial problems with the codependent thinking. I hear so often the implication that if you set good boundaries, if you communicate assertively, your child will get fixed. That is, in essence, the primary modality of thinking of a codependent person. And yet we have professionals who have no business teaching and leading people in this area, teaching that all of the time. You set boundaries because it's a better way of living. And living better is the greatest contribution that you can make to those around you and those that you love. They don't guarantee an outcome. It's just a contribution. It's like putting love or generosity or kindness out in the universe. Professionals would be wise to avoid teaching or implying that recovering from codependency will resolve anyone else's problems. That is one of the problems with the codependent thinking. Recovery from codependency, as some suggest, is not about simply setting stricter boundaries. This is where I get misquoted a lot. Recovery from codependency, as some suggest, is not simply about setting stricter boundaries. It's about setting better boundaries. Better boundaries refer to their quality, the intention and the idea behind the boundary, where it comes from. The boundary's purpose is to separate and distinguish people's emotional lives from one another so each can be connected in a healthier way. Recovery from codependency means different boundaries, and the difference is rooted in each person's differentiation, individuation, and love. I mean, you can feel my passion. I hope you can hear it, because it's a discovery that took me decades to figure out as a practitioner, as a father, as a client in therapy. Here's what they sound like. People always want to know what they sound like. Connected boundaries. Maintaining connection while having boundaries sounds like I'm not comfortable with this. Or this is what I need. Or I'm not willing to participate in the experiment anymore. Or I can't do X or I will risk my own recovery. Or I'm not willing for things to go on the way they've been going. Or I don't think you can get what you need here at home. Or here's what I'm willing to do, and here's what I'm not willing to do. Do you hear the gentleness and clarity and strength in those statements? If you happen to be lucky enough to be around somebody with healthy boundaries, you'll hear these kind of phrases. And if you come from the same background that most of us come from, that I came from, at the outset, they will sound weird, crazy, odd, like they're spouting psychobabble or airy fairy nonsensical ideas. But if you grow a little, you'll recognize that these are the people that know who they are and know where they stand. Boundaries, I love the idea that boundaries aren't a wall. Boundaries are a door. Boundaries are, if you want to be in relationship with me, here's what it is. And if it's a child, if you want to have privileges, if you want to have certain freedoms, this is my stance. This is my boundary. I'm not necessarily right. I'm just me. Like I say, in this work, you don't get to be right or good anymore, but you do get to be a person, which is so much better. One of the things we have to do with people in our lives, with our children, with everybody really, is we have to learn to let people down. People that are growing and maturing spiritually and emotionally and psychologically are better at letting people down. Because if you're boundaried, that means you're not going to compromise what you need. And I'm not talking about negotiations or compromise in general. That's a part of all relationships. But boundaries are about taking care of yourself. And when we show our children that we're responsible for taking care of ourselves, we model for them to do the same. The codependent thinking that I have to make them feel good, I don't want them to get hurt, I don't want them to get upset, I want to control, you hear that? I want to control their feelings. That's the disease. But when we shift the entire thinking and say, what do I need? What am I okay with? What can I support? What am I willing to contribute? What do I want to withhold? That kind of thinking will lead you to serenity and confidence and peace and clarity. Here are some things not to say. You need to. You have to. Dr. Reedy said, I say this all the time, these broadcasts are for you, mom and dad. If you're not a parent, it's like I said earlier, and should be pretty obvious. They're for anybody in a relationship, but they're not, excuse me, they're not for you to tell to somebody else. The hope is, of course, if you quote me or another therapist or a doctor or Dan Siegel or James Hollis or Sigmund Freud, and you present this wonderful quote, this wonderful idea to the other person, to the child, that they'll just simply capitulate and change their minds and agree with you. And in reality, we wouldn't want people to do that. We don't want children to be blind followers. We want them to be critical thinkers. We want them to be critical thinkers in relationship to us and our boundaries. Because that kind of critical thinking sets them up to have successful and healthier behaviors, or excuse me, healthier relationships later on in life. You can't treat me this way. I put that one down there because it's more of the version of it that's an empty threat. I hear people say all the time, they can't talk to me that way. And my response is, looks like they can, actually. Looks like they're allowed to. Are you willing to hang up the phone? Are you willing to walk away? Are you willing to say no? If the child is 18, are you willing to say, if you punish me for this boundary that I'm setting? I say this to my children sometimes around boundaries. I've said to them, I don't say it a lot because I'd be guilty of trying to do exactly what I'm teaching you not to do, which is to try to argue or talk or win them over to your way of thinking. I would say to them when they're challenging a boundary, I'll say, what are you asking of me to do? You asking me to give up a value that's core to me so that you feel better? I wouldn't expect or want you to do that in your relationships. And someday, if you're in a relationship with somebody who's not treating you well, you'll be up against the same question. I've said this before. I use the Dalai Lama as an example. He gets all the credit for being so compassionate, so patient, so loving, but he's boundaried. The Dalai Lama is boundaried. He practices self-care at a high discipline level. He can't be there for everybody. It's impossible. Billions of people would want access to him. And so he, in essence, the thing that gives him the great capacity for love and non-judgment and patience, the things that feeds and fuels those wonderful virtues, is his boundary self-care, his meditation, his practice. We can't have capacity without a practice. So if you try to should yourself into being a loving partner or a loving parent, good luck with that. You have to work your way into it. My ability to be patient with my children and my wife is directly related, contingent on how well I'm taking care of myself throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout my life. The better I do at it, the more love I have to give. The more I abdicate the responsibility that I have for my life and hope, cross my fingers that everybody around me will do what I need, the more I remain a victim in my own life, to my own life, to me. You know, the question about whether or not your child is an addict or an alcoholic or bipolar, or, you can get testing and you can have some objective data, of course. I'm not talking about that, but it's not really important when setting a boundary. Think about an alcoholic spouse, a spouse who appears to have a drinking problem. You don't have to be right that they're an alcoholic or not. It's actually technically, spiritually, in recovery terms, none of your business whether your child is an alcoholic or not. It's not even relevant to the question. We like terms like that. We like absolutes because we can hide behind that. We don't have to stand up there spiritually naked and just be a self. Dr. Reedy said it. The diagnostic manual says it. You took this Beck depression inventory and it diagnosed you with depression. So I don't have to be vulnerable by taking a stand. I'm just doing what the data dictates. That's not a real relationship. That's not healing. That's not awareness. That's the old paradigm. When you're trying to decide what your child is, I would tell you, if you're open to it, I would tell you, make that none of your business and decide what you're comfortable with. Telling a child they're never going. I had a mother tell her daughter years ago in my care, no one's ever going to love you with this eating disorder. You're disgusting. I would never do this to my mother. Nobody's going to fall in love with you, she told her daughter. At the same time, the mother was resisting some basic boundaries in the home, in their life. And she lectured at me and she said, "Brad, you don't understand that this what we've learned about eating disorders is they're based on control." And I explained to her, "I think you misunderstand what they mean. They don't mean having a boundary. That's not controlling. They mean emotionally, psychologically trying to coerce somebody into a certain behavior. When you're telling your daughter she's disgusting or she's never going to amount to anything or nobody's going to love her, that's controlling. When you're saying this is what I'm comfortable with and what I'm not, you get to choose, that's not controlling." I've said it to my 14-year-old daughter, who's 14 now. She said when I've held a certain boundary, "I can't be happy with this boundary that you're setting." And very gently I said, "I'm sorry. You kind of have to figure that one out on your own." Because in reality, it's not my job to figure out how and what's going to make you happy. That's your life's work. I don't give that lecture a lot. Again, lecturing is part of the what you might call the spiritual bypass, right? If I can convince you of something, then I don't have to set a boundary. I have on here of things not to say, and I include things like I am hurt, I am angry, I am disappointed, I am proud, I'm not sleeping because I'm so worried and stressed out, I'm not eating. The point of these is when we use our emotional, our feelings to try to change our child's behavior, that in essence, in my experience, is the primary cause of the primary contribution to mental illness in our children. When the child thinks that their parents' feelings are their responsibility, they will spend their lives not knowing themselves and self medicating and trying to escape the shame and the guilt they feel for letting everybody down, or simply becoming a codependent person and losing themselves and becoming somebody else's object. So in recovery, we know my serenity is my responsibility. It doesn't mean as a father, I don't get sad and hurt and angry and disappointed. Although that last one, disappointed, I have made some progress on not getting disappointed. But it's not like I don't get hurt or sad or frustrated or worried. Those things happen. And those things can inform me. They can help me get more clear about myself. But if I hand those to my children, if I tell those to my children with the intent that the child then will shape up and change their behavior so I can sleep at night, so I'm not distressed, so I'm not angry and hurt, I set them up for a life of pathology, of mental illness in their relationships. Someday, then they will have to go to an Al Anon meeting and say, I have to unlearn what my parents told me, that other people's feelings are my responsibility. And I have to relearn or learn for the first time that everybody, what people think about me is none of my business. And that my serenity and everybody else's serenity, peace of mind, well being is their responsibility. And this doesn't make people rude or selfish or unkind. It actually makes them more kind, more giving, more loving, and more compassionate. You know, when parents say you're making me do this or you're giving me no choice, or whether or not you come home is up to you, I don't like those phrases because it's not true. Own your decision. This is my boundary. This is what I can support. You can come home. You can't come home. I will pay for college. I won't pay for college. I will pay for your apartment. I won't pay for your apartment. I'll pay for treatment. If you complete program X, I'll support you to go back to college, whatever it is. But when we throw off the responsibility of our own decisions onto our children, we're again modeling for them a lack of self. I have a few quotes to take home tonight. In times of crisis or overwhelm, it's easy to lose focus and connectedness to the larger mission. The mission is to play a supporting role in the process of someone finding themselves, their true self, beyond external factors and the unfulfilling attachment to their personal history and subsequent limited view of themselves. The mission is to model being a safe container for each person and the group, such that clients have whatever process, make whatever choices they're going to make. Our missions are to are clean and clear relationships with the clients or with our children. At best, all of our efforts are working in concert to be truly safe, honest, and loving, to be a loving container for healing. Notice it is not mentioned that we are to change their minds, fix their patterns, or steer their ship. Mostly it's about sitting in the ship with them for a time. The outcome of healthy parenting is not well behaved children. The outcome of healthy parenting is peace, confidence, and clarity. And Daniel Siegel, one of the greatest teachers in the area of child development in the United States today, out of UCLA, said, even if we have come to understand ourselves well, to do our work, our children will still make their own journey through life. Although we may supply them with a secure foundation throughout our own deepest self understanding, our role as parents serves to support our children's development, not guarantee its outcome. The messages are ubiquitous, folks. All religions, people who try to study child development. I'm not talking about pop psychologists. I'm not talking about somebody who just thinks they know. I'm talking about people who have done their own work and committed their lives to this. It's the same message over and over. So what else? Write a manifesto. Write what your values are. Keep a journal. I'm not a fan of contracts. I'm not a fan of contracts because they don't work. And they don't work because people are using them for the wrong reasons. I think people write contracts so that they can show to their children when the child has violated a rule or a principle and the contract, and therefore the associated boundary or consequence is justified. That's your work to do. And I've never seen a child to this day. I've never seen a child, when presented with that information in a contract, say to the parent, well, I see here you're correct. I did agree to that. I did sign this contract, and I see the associated consequence with it, and I'm very deserving of that consequence. So thanks for pointing that out to me. Never seen it. The contract will not do the work for you. Practice communication skills to stay connected, listening, specifically deep listening, compassionate understanding. Go to therapy, try the 12-step meetings, and make your serenity your project. Remember that codependency and recovery from it changes you, not the person that suffers from the addiction or the mental health. If you want a good start, I know it's self-serving on my part, but I've sent my children and business partners and others that work for us to an intensive and paid full price. Go to an intensive. If you don't like our intensive, find another one. Go to an intensive and start looking into your history, your childhood, your context. Be open to the idea that there may be some unconscious elements in your life that are affecting your behavior and your dynamics. And then live your full life to the best of your ability. All right, folks, I'll take any questions and I'll add them to the next one. Our intensive schedule, November 9th through 13th is our next in-person intensive. We also have an online offering November 11th through 13th. Contact intensives at evoketherapy.com if you're interested. My books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, are on Audible and Amazon. We have support groups for wilderness families, current and alumni wilderness families, each week. The next one is September 22nd. That's tomorrow night at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. And once a month, we have an alumni-only meeting. The next offering for that is September 27th at 6:30 p.m. We have a once-a-month intensive alumni meeting support group, October 11th, 6 p.m. is the next offering. Contact Malia at evoketherapy.com for more information. If you want a coach that's learned the Evoke model, contact coaching at evoketherapy.com. Parenting, couples, life. We have pursuit trips for families and young adults. If you want to do a customized adventure trip, 3 to 30 days for young adults or for families, think therapy light, think adventure and fun, family vacation with some therapeutic support, communication support. We ask all current parents to go to 6 12-step support groups, like I said. All of these broadcasts are on your favorite podcast app or Spotify. Just search Finding You and Evoke Therapy Podcast. You can also go to soundcloud.com on your computer or Evoke's YouTube channel and watch or listen there. You can find Evoke Therapy programs or me, Dr. Brad Reedy, on Twitter and Instagram using the handle at Evoke Therapy or at Dr. Brad Reedy, respectively. You can also find the Intensives program on Instagram using the handle at Evoke Therapy Intensives. Or, at Evoke Therapy Intensives. On Facebook, you can find us by searching Evoke Therapy programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives. And of course, our blog has wonderful content each week curated by Malia, who does a wonderful job. If you want to give back to help people that can't afford treatment and therapy, our 3 partners are choosementalhealth.org, sky'sthelimitfund.org, or the evokefamilyfoundation.org. You can go there and find ways to give back. My next broadcast will be, actually, I'm going to have to reschedule that because I have a trip next week that I'll be at. So we'll have some dates coming up for you for the next Q&A. All right, folks, thanks for joining me. On behalf of the people that you love and that love you, thank you for being willing to do your work. And thank you for showing up. Have a great evening, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.